on the screen if you happen to copy something off the internet, but it may also be the same. I'm keeping a running rotation of prayer and readers. So, Jack, it's your turn. If you wouldn't mind, would you word us in prayer? Thank you.
Heavenly Father, this hour as we assemble and see your glory this day. Look upon us as we open your word, study the characteristics of those that you use to your glory to bring about church and Son of God sacrifice for us. We ask that you would be with us as we do so, those here and downstairs, as we continue our growth and knowledge of those that are around us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, Jack. So we got just a little bit of information as we begin, and this is something I sent out about Bathsheba. She is the daughter of Eliam, or another passage is Amiel. I don't think I got that in my notes, but it's First Chronicles 3 verse 5 mentions this name here, and from what I understand, that's this same name. It's just the two components of the name are backwards in this name here. But that's why Chronicles has a different name. The daughter of Eliam or Amiel, the wife of Uriah. And so 2 Samuel 11 verse 3 talks about Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah. Eliam is somebody who was one of David's mighty men. He's mentioned in 2 Chronicles or 2 Samuel 23 verse 34. But the question is, are these the same Eliams? And if they are the same Eliams, then Eliam's, I'm not sure how you pronounce his name anyway, that would mean Bathsheba is the granddaughter of Ahithophel. And that would be interesting because of what we know about Ahithophel. But so just for right now, I'm curious if y'all do any more research. There's some people that would say this is the same man in both these passages. There's others who would say they must be different men. But if they're the same, then Bathsheba is the granddaughter of Ahithophel. And here's some things we know about Ahithophel. He talks about it. He is Ahithophel, the Gileonite, 2 Samuel 23, verse 34. He was one of David's counselors. And 2 Samuel 16:23 indicates that whenever he counseled, it was as if he were speaking God's words. I mean, that's how people how highly they regarded him. But he sides with Absalom when Absalom has this conspiracy in 2 Samuel 15 through 17. Instead of staying with David, he sides with Absalom. And 2 Samuel 15 verse 12 mentions that now Ahithophel is siding with Absalom. And we'll talk about that more in a moment, just a second. So the question is Bathsheba the granddaughter of Ahithophel? She was, if Eliam is the same person in both of those passages. There are some who would say that Ahithophel wouldn't have been old enough to have a married granddaughter at that time, so it's not the same person. There's others that say, yes, it's the same person, and the reason that that Ahithophel sided with Absalom is because of what David did to Bathsheba and Uriah, what David did to his granddaughter. And so that's interesting to consider. But this fourth screen is just emphasizing what we know about Eliam and especially Uriah. David had some mighty men. It makes me think of like those who protect the president of the United States. But David had some mighty men, and Eliam, the son of Ahithophel, was one of these mighty men, and Uriah was one of these mighty men. So that's just some material we threw out there to give us some background about Bathsheba and some of the relatives or some of the connections she had with some of these men. Anybody have any thoughts or comments, or anybody want to present their view of whether Eliam is the same man in both of those passages?
went with Absalom because of what David did. He had so much power, and he wanted power to kind of vengeful. If that was the case, that Bathsheba was his granddaughter, and he was avenging that
Yeah.
family.
Yeah, if the Eliam is the same person in both of those passages that we looked at, then Bathsheba would be the granddaughter of Ahithophel, because Ahithophel was the father of Eliam, and and that could give a motive for Ahithophel, even though he was David's counselor, he ended up siding with Absalom against David. Anyway, it's interesting. I don't know. I kind of lean toward them being the same person, but there's no way we could prove either way, I don't believe. So one of the first questions that we sent out was this one here. What's one of the greatest things we know about Bathsheba? And we're focusing on a New Testament passage.
The lineage of Jesus.
Right. That's anytime you think about somebody that's part of the lineage of Jesus, that gives you a good check mark. I mean, it's something it's a good thing to think about. And so,
Well, I got information from Acts 2:30, but also this is mentioning Bathsheba, the name, daughter of an oath. And I was thinking, maybe that goes back.
yeah, daughter of oaks. Yeah, sometimes the scriptures say this name means such and such. Other times we can do a word search and find out what others think names mean. Sometimes I'm not so sure that what others say names mean, they actually mean that. But Linda pointed out one thing there. What Acts passage did you say?
The fruit of David's loins, and that would have meant, I'm trying to think how I figured that was the New Testament scripture for Bathsheba.
Well,
It would have been, because she was David's wife, so the fruit of David, well, he had other wives, so I don't know, I got put 2:30.
yeah, because God said he would seat one of David's descendants on his throne. Who's the main physical king after David sitting on his throne? Solomon. But ultimately we get to Jesus Christ. So maybe that's the connection that Linda's making there. But I was just thinking about this thought of just making sure we pointed out that she was in the genealogy of Jesus.
Nathan, she's not Nathan's mother. How does that? Because he's through Joseph, right? She's Mary's ancestor.
Yeah. Just Matthew points out the married partner of David, Jesus coming through David. Yep.
And an interesting, Matthew 1:6 refers to it as bride as well,
Mm-hmm.
not my name, which she is in other places.
Yep.
And have people like Rahab mentioned by name. Just interesting that what goes on there.
Yeah. Yep. We'll be reading some of chapter 11, some of chapter 12, but when you, in your studies, when you read these chapters, do we have any indication about what type of relationship Bathsheba had with God? Was she a woman who looked to God and trusted in Him? Was she a woman who lived close to God? Was she just a religious pretender?
First Samuel, I think when I read that, it had please do it.
Second Samuel, chapter 11 and 12. I hope I didn't throw y'all off. I've got 1 Samuel in my notes. Yes, thanks. I didn't even realize I'd done that. I hope, did y'all realize I was talking about 2 Samuel 11 and 12? I hope. Oh, okay, yeah. So did you come up with anything about, is there anything in there that would cause us to go one direction or another? Yes.
She go to a ritual or something to purify for her cleanness.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if like she feel the sin or something that made her do this. Like,
Yeah, the second, in 2 Samuel 11 and verse 4, it talks about she being purified from her uncleanness. Now, let's think about that for a moment. Just the fact that she was, there's something about the old law, right, that she's keeping. So that does say something, that's one of the things I found as well. That does say something about her, at least she's keeping something about the old law. Now, let's talk about what this means, because I think that the New American Standard, I think, throws us off on this. And like we're looking at 2 Samuel chapter 11 and verse 4. It said, David sent messengers and took her, and when she came to him, he lay with her. And then it says, and when she had purified herself from her uncleanness, she returned to her house. And when she had. So this makes it sound like that this is something she did after the fact, after being with David. Now, the New King James says that David lay with her, for she was cleansed from her impurity. She had already been purified from something, and that's why David lay with her. I wrote down English Standard Version, now she had been purifying herself from her uncleanness. I think, as I understand the situation, you know, when David sees her, what is she doing? What's Bathsheba doing when David sees her? She's bathing. I think she's cleaning herself from her impurity. The law had some things, you can look at Leviticus 15 for one passage, several others. The law had some things about a woman during her menstrual period that she had to go through she had to be cleansed of her impurity. I believe that's what it's talking about, that she had done that, and now when she gets with David, he lays with her because she had been cleansed from her impurity. I think that's what it's talking about. Now, again, the New American Standard, I think, I don't like the way it's worded because it makes it sound like maybe before she returned home, she was cleansed from her impurity of being with David. But I don't think that's the context. But one point about all of this is that whichever it is, and maybe we can pinpoint which it is, but whichever it is, she was doing something in keeping with the law. So that does, speak well about her in one sense.
What it said, the impurity and of her menstrual, I always read that to let us know that it was without a doubt she was not pregnant by her husband. She was just getting off her cycle, so
Yeah.
she could not. Just let us really know that this was David's.
Well,
David.
if it is talking about being purified from her menstrual period, if it's talking about being purified from having this unlawful relationship with David, then that doesn't speak anything about necessarily the proof that whose baby. But if it's talking about she'd been purified from her menstrual period, then that would maybe add some proof that this is David's baby, because she wouldn't have been pregnant prior to this from her husband. But anyway, I from looking at everything, I think it's talking about she had, because the reason David went in and was with her is because she had been purified from her uncleanness.
She had some culpability in this agreed to the relationship.
Well, we're going to talk about that. we got some.
Book said something that's not backed up in the Bible, but it's probably true that she couldn't resist the king. Well, we'll talk about that. We got a couple of questions on that. In fact, this next question kind of deals, at least we start dealing with that a little bit. Let me read you a list of names. I really appreciate everybody that's willing to read, and it may be that here's the ones I've got read. I'm trying to do a rotation. I've already got Robin, Laura, Kathy, Patricia, Linda, Abby, Shane, Mark, Tommy, Kevin, Jack, Scott, Dallas. Anybody's name not on here that wants to read 2 Samuel chapter 11, the first 3 verses? Okay, Regina, thank you. 2 Samuel 11, the first 3 verses.
all Israel. And they ravaged the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah, but David remained at Jerusalem. It happened late one afternoon, when David arose from his couch and was walking on the roof of the king's house, that he saw from the roof a woman bathing, and the woman was very beautiful. And David sent and inquired about the woman. And one said, "Is not this Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite?"
Okay, so there's some will make a point about maybe David should have been with his men off into battle. I don't know, maybe so, or maybe, I mean, there was a common practice of kings going with their men in battles, but maybe there's a situation also where a king would just send his representatives. Anybody has any thoughts on that, you can let us know. But David sees this woman bathing, and if we got the context right, she would be cleaning because of trying to purify herself. But he sent and requires about the woman, and this is Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite. And we ask the question, has Bathsheba done anything wrong at this point? Well, no. Yes?
This was getting very confusing about the virgin and a married woman, but in Deuteronomy 22 to 24, there was mention of, she was with her husband, he knew it, don't you think?
Yeah, but we're not there yet.
She tried not, which means she made no.
But we're not there yet. No, look, wait.
Had she done anything wrong?
At this point, though, at verse 3, Bathsheba, the only thing Bathsheba has done right now, she don't even know about David yet, as far as David sending for her yet. At this point, yeah, that's what we're asking. She's up on the roof. The only thing she could have done wrong, if she did something wrong, would have been what? Exposing herself to others, right? But that's what we're asking: has she done something wrong at this point in time?
The roof was the place where they did it. I wondered why it would have been, since everybody's roof was sort of flat, why would there have been some kind of privacy curtain or something up around the area?
And there could have been. Some describe probably David's position as being a lot higher than what Bathsheba's was. She could have had some kind of privacy. From what we know, from what we would know, Bathsheba would just simply be in her spot of normal bathing, and nothing wrong with what she had done, from what we know at this point.
Are y'all's translation saying she's on the roof or that David's on the roof? The CSB says from the roof he saw a woman bathing. Is y'all saying that she is up on a roof?
No, mine is not. That's a good point. Verse 2, when evening came, David arose from his bed and walked around on the roof of the king's house, and from the roof he saw a woman bathing. From the roof, from his roof or her roof? Well, probably from his roof, right? Yes.
Was they call it the mikvah. The mikvah was from rainbow, and it had the cistern in the ground that was actually used and then emptied every time. So it was in the ground. It contacted with the
Interesting. Yeah.
and it was the vessel, and it's, or the cleansing is the vessel, which was the cistern in the ground. And that's when the women cleanse themselves every month. And
So could they have carried that water from that cistern somewhere else to be cleansed?
it's
It-
supposed to be in
Okay. So bottom line would be this, right? Wherever Bathsheba is, from what we know, she was not publicly exposing herself to the world. Okay, so we would say at this point, if that be true, at this point, she's done nothing wrong. Yeah. If this is where the story ended, has David done anything wrong that we would know of yet? He saw her. Yeah, but one reason we can come to that conclusion is because of what we see. I mean, I might see a woman out there walking on the street, and at first glance I see that she's a pretty woman, but then I don't think anything else about it. So, but we know that David looked longer because of what we have that follows. So somebody else that hasn't read yet, let's keep reading verse 4 through verse 12. If you didn't have your name on the list. Okay, Charles. Thank you, Charles. Verse 4 through verse 12.
David sent messengers and took her, and she came to him, and he lay with her. Now she had been purifying herself from her uncleanness. Then she returned to her house. And the woman conceived, and she sent and told David, I am pregnant. So David sent word to Joab, send me Uriah the Hittite. Joab sent Uriah to David. When Uriah came to him, David asked how Joab was doing, and how the people were doing, and how the war was going. Then David said to Uriah, go down to your house and wash your feet. And Uriah went out of the king's house, and there followed him a present from the king. But Uriah slept at the door of the king's house with all of the servants of his lord, and did not go down to his house. When they told David, Uriah did not go down to his house. David said to Uriah, have you not come from a journey? Why did you not go down to your house? Uriah said to David, the ark and Israel and Judah dwell in booths, and my lord Joab and the servants of my lord are camping in the open field. Shall I then go to my house to eat and to drink and to lie with my wife? As you live and as your soul lives, I will not do this thing. Then David said to Uriah, remain here today also, and tomorrow I will send you back. So Uriah remained in Jerusalem that day and the next.
Okay, so we're focusing on Bathsheba, but let's talk about David for a moment. What is David doing? What does David do that James talks about in James 1 about sin? David's giving birth to sin. James 1 says we're enticed by our own lust. And then it says when lust has what? Conceived, it gives birth to sin. And so we see David doing that. As Tommy kind of pointed out as we keep reading, he sees David sees Bathsheba. She's a beautiful woman, but he doesn't just let it end there and think about other things. He's still thinking about her because he, first of all, asks who she is, and he's told what? She's the wife of Uriah. And then he says, oh, okay, I didn't know she's married, right? No, then he's still thinking about that. And so he sends for her, and that lust has conceived, and then it brings forth sin. And so that's exactly what happens. And we asked the question, question 4, was this a sin of adultery? There's no two ways about it, is there? I mean, what's adultery? Huh? Okay, cheating on your mate. Yeah. A married person having sexual relations with someone else. That other person may be married or that other person may not be married. But in this case, you have both who would have mates. But so this is adultery. And we asked the question, if it was, which it was, what was the punishment according to the law of Moses? We have several passages listed there. Okay, what's the first two passages, the law, Exodus 20:15, Deuteronomy 5:15 says, thou shalt not commit adultery. Yeah, you shall not steal.
Is that what you intended?
Well, probably not, but would still work in one sense. Don't take somebody else's mate. What is the passage of Exodus 20? Yeah.
14.
Okay, verse 14. That's what I intended, but
He didn't steal her. He let her go back.
He stole her for a moment. Yeah. Verse 14, yes.
Women, I know they want to be real critical, and I don't know how in touch with God's law would have to be, but it was like they could just do whatever they wanted to. They wanted, they just take.
Okay, hang on a second. That's question 5. So we'll get there in just a second, Linda. Linda's really wanting to get that question. But, and I wasn't going to spend a whole lot of time on this, but just to point out, I mean, like Leviticus 18 verse 20, you shall not have intercourse with your neighbor's wife to be defiled with her. In Leviticus 20 verse 10, if there's a man who commits adultery with another man's wife, one who commits adultery with his friend's wife, the adulterer and the adulteress shall surely be put to death. Deuteronomy 22:22, if a man is found lying with a married woman, then both of them shall die, the man who lay with the woman and the woman, thus you shall purge the evil from Israel. That's what the law says. That's what the law required. Now we get to the question Linda's wanting us to discuss. We love Linda. Question 5, why did Bathsheba go along with David? Was she wrong in doing this? Do we learn anything about her character from this? Does the teaching of Deuteronomy 22, 25 to 27 have any bearing on this particular situation? What's that passage? What principle is that passage teaching? Deuteronomy 22.
Verses 22 to 24.
25 to 27. Pardon? No, this is yeah.
I mean, this sounds like in Deuteronomy that it's if the man, he's committing rape, I mean, that he's seized her and taken advantage of her.
Yeah.
And so he should be put to death, but not her.
Yeah. In these particular verses, verse 25 through 27, and we're talking about it. Verse 25 talks about one who's engaged. Deuteronomy talking about one who's engaged. A man forces her. What's the emphasis on what the girl does? Why is the girl not held accountable in this particular situation? Okay, what else though? Yeah, verse 27. She cries out. A girl. She cries out. I mean, if one doesn't cry, if one doesn't cry out, then there may be a problem there. But she cries out. So just asking if this has any bearing, you may think it does or does not when it comes to Bathsheba being with David. But let's kind of first of all look at the first part of this. Why does Bathsheba go along with David? Kevin mentioned one thing earlier. Possibly because this was the king and you didn't disobey the king. David sent for the king.
In verse 4, it also says she came to him. Does that just mean that she walked over to the palace and had a presence, or does that mean that she's more?
What we would know, that's a good question. What we would know is that David sends for her, she comes to the king, and now at some point she knows what the king wants. And so now what's she going to do? And does she have that sexual relationship with him because he's the king? And she feels like she can't, that there's no way she can get out of that? Did she recognize that this was doing something wrong? Or did she think that this is what the king's commanded and I got to obey the king's command and so I'm really innocent in this? It's the onus is on him. I mean,
You would think that she would know that and all, but people want to rationalize things and as we said, I think that ultimately we're not going to know. But, you can rationalize and say that, she's saying, well, the king's, somewhat forcing me to do it. And he's the king, I need to do whatever he said. We don't know.
yeah.
And it doesn't appear that there's any reluctance on her part. And I can't read from it myself, but that, she was taken by force. So, it sounds like she went along willingly and she gave into it willingly. But again, we don't know.
Yeah. And there's questions we ask that we cannot nail down the answer to, but sometimes when we consider the possibilities, then we also can say, if this be the case, then, how can what application can we make of that? Or, I'll get you just a second, Abby. Something else, because we could also view Bathsheba, because we don't know, we could also view Bathsheba as somebody who felt special because the king sent for her and wanted her. Somebody that even had some, maybe she was in a bad marriage. Maybe she liked his attention from the king. So that's another possibility. But to Charles's point, there's questions we're going to ask in studies like this that we're trying to put ourselves in her shoes, and we can't nail down an answer. But when we look at some of the possibilities, then we ought to be able to make some applications from that. For example, if it was that she was attracted to the king herself like he was to her, we certainly can learn from that, right? Just because we got to guard against those attractions and don't get ourselves involved in the wrong anyway. Abby?
Did they tell her what David wanted, or was she just told the king wants to see you?
Yeah.
And if that's the case, then maybe she didn't know what she was walking into.
Yeah. And I wouldn't think that I would think that the king, he just sends men and say, go get this person here. Especially if he's going to commit adultery with somebody, I wouldn't think that he's going to say, go get this woman because I want to be with her. I would think she just gets the message the king wants to see you. And I would assume David's forming this in his mind, thinking that this already, but maybe he's so attracted to her, he wants to see her, and then he decides to go through with something. I don't know on that, but I think there's more. Tommy?
David's rationalization as well. And that's why sins. He's saying that Bathsheba's the guilty party. She's the one that wanted this. She didn't stop it. She had nothing. She could have said no. That's David's rationalization for his sin. And it's not until Nathan tells him, no, David, you took the lamb. You were this guilty person, that David finally realizes that, hey, it wasn't Bathsheba, it was me. And that's Nathan's whole point to him. And he says to David, you took the wife of Uriah to be your wife. The sword will never leave your house because you did this. And Nathan seems to ardently tell David, this is your sin. This is your problem that you caused. And you took this for yourself. You were that bad example that he tells David in the first part of chapter 12.
Yeah, and I would say, when we get to chapter 12, God's approaching David in a way that David's not going to be able to rationalize or get out of anything. But prior to this, do we find David trying to rationalize his sin? We don't have any detail about David's thoughts, do we? In fact, I wonder why.
Just from the discussion with Nathan, it seems that he is rational.
Oh, is he rational? I mean, okay, maybe rationalizing in what way? In saying it was Bathsheba's fault. I can see him rationalizing, saying I'm the king, and I can do what I want, and I've really done nothing wrong. I'm a special servant of God. Yeah, rationalizing. I think he did rationalize, but in what way? I guess is how we don't know in what way. But if he hadn't rationalized his sin, then what would he have done? He would have repented, right? And that's what we would have expected of David, a man after God's heart. But there's something going on. And in fact, it gets so bad that we haven't read it yet, but you already know it anyway. It gets so bad that he ultimately is even guilty of murder.
She cried not. She knew she was married. I get it that he's the king, and I get it that she would be scared to death. said, I think they thought they just did everything they want. But if she'd have cried out, then, of course, he's the king, he probably wouldn't have been killed, but I'm just saying, that was one of the stipulations for if the woman was also killed, if she cried out or not. She obviously didn't say anything, that she was married, because wasn't he upset later when he found out?
Well, no, I mean, he was told right off that when he asked who she was, he was told that she's the wife of Uriah, that she was the wife of Uriah. So he knew she was married to start with. But, and we don't have any information. Was David and Bathsheba alone somewhere and she did cry out? I mean, it doesn't say anything about that, but here's a bottom line, I guess. We're trying to put ourselves in her situation, and was she wrong in what she did? That's what we're asking. How would God view her at this point in time in this particular situation?
Abraham was in the same kind of situation, wasn't his wife, and someone wanted her? And he told her to stay with his sister. She was his sister. They were scared to death back then. Women were to not comply. Yeah.
So if somebody is scared to death, Abraham is scared that they're going to, because his wife's so beautiful, they're going to take her and put him to death. Is that a lack of faith in God? If you're scared to death, do you still need to trust God and make sure you do the right thing? Yeah. I mean, Abraham shouldn't have been deceitful that way. But anyway, if this, as I understand it, this is a sin of adultery, and Bathsheba was guilty of that, unless it was a situation where God doesn't tell us everything, and that she was like one who cried out, and she was actually forced and wasn't able to do anything about it. But
either way, the law was carried out.
Yeah.
Whether it was David alone or David and Bathsheba, certainly sin, and according to the law, he should have been put to death. That's the big question. Why wasn't it carried out? He shouldn't have been anything special just because he was the king. But God's plan was what's God's plan.
Yeah. And maybe part of that is we talked before how that we gave a couple of passages where sometimes God didn't punish sin right then and there. Even Jesus, whenever the woman was caught in adultery, Jesus said what? Let him who is without sin do what? Cast the first stone. And then Jesus told the woman what? You're an adulteress, you need to die. Did he say that, or did he say what? He said what? Did no one condemn you? Neither do I. In other words, you're forgiven. Go and sin no more, or something like that. But anyway, that's.
And he knew he was violating the law here, and we can't excuse that. We don't know the whole situation for her because there was a tradition that if a woman was called for the king, she could not refuse him. And she had one other option. If this was the case, she could have said no, and they could have stoned her to death or whatever. So she was up against a hard spot in the rock in this situation.
Yeah.
And what exactly we see here is that we're caught in a situation where we have to make a choice whether to do the right thing and take the consequences of that, or whether we cave in and do whatever we're asked to do.
Yeah. So here's what I was talking about when we consider some of the possibilities, because we don't know for sure, but we consider some of the possibilities. And here's one possibility: is if she realized this was wrong, but she just went ahead and gave in to what the king said because of maybe the consequences because of who he was, then we can make an application of that, right? That if we're in some kind of similar, the elders say something the elders lead us in a certain direction that we understand is not right. Are we going to stand before God and say, well, the elders are the ones that did that? No, we have our own responsibility, right? So does Bathsheba. If if it was a situation where she was attracted to the king just like he was to her, and she just gave into a sinful situation, well, we can make application of that as well. Don't do that. Yeah.
But Nathan again calls her an innocent lamb after the fact, because Nathan is not talking to David about the sin of adultery they had. Nathan is telling David, you shouldn't have taken her as your wife. And so this is after the fact that Nathan calls her an innocent lamb. I don't know that we could say that she was guilty here if God, through the prophet Nathan, tells David that in this parable that she's the lamb.
Well, I'm not sure that God is trying to tell us some kind of innocence about Bathsheba in what he says to Nathan.
Where does it call her? I mean, my for ESV just refers to her as being a little ewe lamb.
I guess I'm saying that's the point of the story, is that this lamb is spotless, this pure lamb that would have been considered under the law, and this is one of the lambs that would have been very prominent, would have been needed for the sacrifices. And so this rich man had no problem just stealing that lamb away.
Well, when we read a parable, usually there's one main point of a parable, and we've got to be careful not to extend that and make parables into something that's not. To me, what we're seeing in chapter 12, the main point of this parable is, here's a man that has what? Just one lamb that means a lot to him. That's Uriah, who has this wife that means a lot to him. And David, you took that man's one little ewe lamb. I don't see it as God giving us some kind of indication, telling us that Bathsheba was innocent like an innocent lamb or whatever. But the main point is, you took this man's, you had all these lambs, and you took this man, the only lamb this man had. That's what you did, David.
Well, we see with God, told David, where do you despise the law? He was chastised very seriously.
Yeah. Yep.
And fallen on charges by God himself of the things he did. I try to look at this whole picture. Just because you're in a situation of importance, you control people, don't mean you ought to be doing it. And that's exactly what he did. He was wrong from the get-go. Now, Bathsheba, I don't know about this side of the thing. If you go by the custom, she could have been stoned to death if she refused. And yes, she committed adultery. If she was a child Israelite, she probably could refuse to take the stone. But whatever it is here, David has turned his back on God at this point in time in this situation.
Yeah.
And the captain for us is not to do that, even if the lure of what was there is strong, you have to deny that.
Yeah. I want to make a comment on it for a second, then we'll move to question 6. But one of the things we're encouraged by in God's Word, whenever we realize our own shortcomings, our own disappointments, how we disappoint God, our own sins, we can be encouraged that even a man after God's heart committed sin, and yet what? Was forgiven by God. I mean, when we read Psalm 51, David's heart comes out in that psalm. My sin is ever before me, etc. So it's mind-boggling in one sense to see, from what we know of David, to see a man who didn't repent right away, but at the same time, we understand how sin can grab you and how you can rationalize or justify things, and maybe your eyes, you have kind of deceived yourself in that situation. And all of a sudden, here comes God through Nathan, and David says, "I'm the man." But we're trying to put ourselves in Bathsheba's shoes and try to understand where she was at this point in time, etc. Did others know about what David and Bathsheba had done? If you were Bathsheba, would you be concerned about your influence? Would you be concerned about the possibility of your husband finding out? Would you tell your husband what happened? What would God want you to do in this situation? If you were Bathsheba, maybe that last question is most important. What do you think God would want in this situation of Bathsheba? Repentance? And at some point, she finds out that she's with child.
I mean, I guess it depends on if you view this as her willing participant. If she was a willing participant, then she wouldn't need repentance.
Yeah.
It depends on how you view the situation.
Yeah. Would you tell your husband about this situation? I mean, regardless, would you tell your husband what's happened?
Talk about, some kind of
Yeah.
sexual battery or rape.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
And as we read the story, she might not have had an opportunity unless she saw her husband outside, not coming in. But
That was control. He took the lamb, the man took the lamb, David took Bathsheba, and then he planned, she just told him she was pregnant. And then from then on, we see David next. David's the one that called Uriah. David's the one that tried to get him to cover it up by going and acting like it was his child. We don't see Bathsheba doing anything here but following what David is leading her into.
possibility, because like what we're saying, Regina, is that we don't know if Bathsheba. We don't know if that's one of the questions. We don't know if Bathsheba willingly accepted what David was doing, or if she resisted. Maybe it is what you're describing, that David that David took her and she was innocent all along, and maybe she did cry out and there was nobody there to hear her. I don't know, but we're looking. We kind of looked at what the situation could be, and then how we can make application of that. And now let me go ahead and get to question 7, because we're asking some things that I think that are good to think about, but we might not be able to nail down, like in verse 6, or question 6, also question 5. But what kind of man was Bathsheba's husband Uriah? What do we know about Uriah? Honorable man, integrity, and we keep reading to the point that, I mean, here's David's trying to cover up his sin now, and he invites Uriah to go down and go to his house and actually be with his wife. And why doesn't Uriah do that? Yeah, I can't do that. My fellow soldiers are out fighting and so forth. I can't do that. That shows a man of honor. He has a sense of duty. It also shows a man that is not so self-centered that he's going to go and be with his wife and enjoy that pleasure whenever there's other things going on. He can't really, he's sort of conscientious about that, and so he's not so self-centered about what would pleasure him that he's going to go ahead and do that.
8:33 calls him a priest, if that's the same Uriah.
I don't know if that'd be the same, but I'd have to look at that. But the second bell's rang, so we gotta stop. But I wanted to at least get to that point because in all of this we see David, and we've discussed whether we've discussed to what extent Bathsheba would have sin or not, and then we see her husband that shines as an innocent person, a man of integrity and honor and so forth, and then David is guilty of putting him to death. Okay, we got to stop there, and I guess who teaches, I'll be on vacation from this point, but we'll just pick up where we left off. Thank you.